Friend. John said again, a little louder, like he was tasting the word for the first time in his 8-year-old life. Then he pointed at Sandra. Friend. At his father standing frozen on the sidewalk. Friend. At himself. Friend. Laurie Robinson's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees right there on the manicured grass, hands clutching his head. 8 years of silence shattered by one perfect, impossible word. The moment was already recorded, the doorbell camera had captured everything, but nothing could have prepared Laurie for what he'd witnessed with his own eyes. His 8-year-old son, John Larry, who had never spoken a single syllable since he was 3 months old, was standing on their front lawn next to the iron gate. And there, on the other side of the bars, was a teenage black girl in a worn, brightly patterned dress and scuffed sneakers. Someone who absolutely shouldn't be in their gated community. Laurie's hand had hovered over his phone 30 seconds ago, ready to call security after Mrs. Henderson's frantic complaint about an unauthorized solicitor harassing the children. But then he'd seen something that made his blood freeze. John was smiling. Not the careful, practiced smile he gave his therapists when they prompted him. Not the sad, apologetic half-smile he offered Laurie when another specialist gave up. This was real joy spreading across his son's face like sunrise breaking through years of clouds. And then, Laurie would replay this moment in his mind for the rest of his life. John's mouth moved. Not randomly. Not like the 1,000 times before when doctors had watched hopefully, waiting for sounds that never came. He was forming a word. One perfect, desperate, beautiful word. The girl hadn't used any special techniques. Hadn't employed the carefully calibrated speech therapy protocols that had filled their home with clinical precision for 8 years. She'd simply been standing there on the sidewalk, gesturing wildly as she told some animated story, treating John like he was just another kid who could respond. Behind Laurie, his assistant Marcus stood paralyzed, phone still clutched in his hand mid-dial to security. His eyes were wide, locked on the impossible scene unfolding on the lawn. "Sir," Marcus breathed, barely audible. Did John just? He spoke, Laurie whispered, his voice cracking like shattered glass. My son spoke. And he was speaking for her, this girl in the colorful dress who'd somehow done in 30 minutes what $2.3 million worth of specialists couldn't do in 8 years. John wasn't just making sounds. He was defending her. Fighting for her with the voice he'd kept locked away since infancy. 30 minutes earlier. The security footage would show it all later, when Laurie replayed it obsessively, trying to decode the miracle that had walked into his life disguised as a trespasser. John sits alone on the front steps during his mandatory, outdoor sensory time, sketch pad balanced on his knees. He's drawing again. Always drawing. The only language his therapists say he trusts. A girl enters the frame from beyond the gate, carrying a worn canvas bag and a stack of bright pamphlets. She's going door to door, her movements unscripted, energetic. She's talking to someone off camera, no, to herself, practicing something, her hands moving in exaggerated gestures that tell their own story. She notices John through the bars of the gate. Waves enthusiastically. Doesn't wait for a response, probably doesn't expect one from a kid in this neighborhood. She walks right up to the gate like she belongs there. John looks up. His pencil stops mid-stroke. For the first time in the 3 weeks of footage Laurie would later obsessively review, John's complete attention shifts from his drawing to another human being. Really seeing them. The girl is telling a story. Her whole body participates, hands flying, face animated with expressions that shift like weather, voice carrying across the lawn with unfiltered joy. John stands. Walks toward the gate. Unprecedented. His therapist's notes would call this significant voluntary social approach behavior. John shows her his drawing through the bars. The girl studies it, really studies it, not with the clinical assessment his therapists use, but with genuine curiosity. Then she does something no specialist has ever done. She laughs, not politely, not professionally, but with pure, unguarded delight. She's calling him something. Her mouth forms words John seems to understand. Later, Laurie would learn she'd nicknamed him Captain Silent. She's building some kind of imaginary game using a stick and a crushed soda can from the gutter, transforming trash into treasure through sheer imagination. John's shoulders shake. He's laughing, silently, the way he always does, but unmistakably. The girl notices immediately. Her grin widens like she's won the lottery. She says something else. The footage has no audio, but John's reaction is instantaneous. Electric. The first sound. John's mouth opens, and though Laurie can't hear it from his study window 200 feet away, he can see it. His son makes a noise. An actual, audible sound that causes the girl to freeze, eyes wide. Mrs. Henderson appears on camera, storming across her perfectly manicured lawn toward the gate, finger pointed, mouth moving in what Laurie knows is her trademark indignant tirade. Laurie's phone rings. The security alert flashes. He rushes to the window just in time to see Mrs. Henderson berating the girl, who stands her ground with quiet dignity. And that's when the impossible becomes real. Present moment. Now Laurie kneels on his own lawn, watching his son, his silent, unreachable son, grip the iron gate with both small hands and shout at him, at Mrs. Henderson, at the security guard jogging up the sidewalk, "Friend. Stay." Good. Friend stays. The words are rough, unpracticed, raw as open wounds. John's voice cracks on every syllable, rusty from 8 years of disuse. But they're words. Real words. Chosen words. Sandra, he'll learn her name is Sandra Lucier in about 90 seconds, looks as shocked as everyone else. Her hand flies to her mouth, eyes wide, darting between John's desperate face and Laurie's collapsed form. John, Laurie manages, finding his legs, stumbling toward his son. "John, you." "Friend." John shouts again, and this time tears stream down his face, but he doesn't stop. His small fist pounds against the gate. "Stay." Friend stays. Sandra drops into a crouch on her side of the gate, eye level with John. "Hey, Captain Silent," she says softly, her voice gentle despite the chaos. "I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'm right here. I promise." And John, miracle of miracles, answered prayer, impossible gift, whispers his first freely chosen word. Not shouted in defense, but spoken in trust, "Stay." Then, softer, almost a question, "Please?" The world tilts. The axis shifts. Everything Laurie thought he knew about his son, about healing, about what money can and cannot buy, realigns in a single devastating moment. The speech pathologist he'd fired yesterday had cost him $47,000 over 6 months of failures. The neurological specialist before that, $83,000. The experimental music therapy program, $126,000. 8 years of the best specialists money could buy, and not one of them could do what this girl with the worn sneakers and the $5 dress accomplished with nothing but genuine connection. "Call off security," Laurie orders, his voice strangled. "Marcus, call them off now. And someone get that gate open. Because the source of his miracle is standing on the wrong side of his property line, and he'll be damned, if he lets her leave before he understands how she performed the unthinkable." Mrs. Henderson is still sputtering about solicitation laws and property values, but Laurie doesn't hear her. All he hears is his son's voice, fragile, broken, beautiful, saying one word over and over like a prayer. "Friend. Friend. Friend." How did a girl with nothing give him everything? And how does he make sure she never, ever leaves? 6 months earlier. Dr. Patricia Chen was the 14th specialist Laurie Robinson had hired in 8 years. She came with credentials from Johns Hopkins, a waiting list 18 months long, and a fee structure that would make most people's mortgage payments look reasonable. None of that mattered to Laurie. He would have paid twice as much for half the pedigree if it meant hearing his son's voice. The therapy room on the mansion's second floor had been designed specifically for these sessions. Soft lighting that wouldn't overstimulate. Acoustics calibrated to eliminate echo. A one-way mirror so Laurie could observe without John feeling watched. Every detail controlled, perfected, optimized for success. John sat cross-legged on the ergonomic floor cushion, his blonde hair catching the carefully diffused afternoon light. 8 years old and heartbreakingly beautiful, with his mother's delicate features and Laurie's blue eyes. Eyes that tracked Dr. Chen's movements with quiet intelligence but revealed nothing of the thoughts churning behind them. "John," Dr. Chen said, her voice professionally warm, "can you show me what you did at school today? Use your words if you can, or show me with the puppets." John didn't reach for the puppets. He never did. Instead, his small hand moved to the sketch pad that went everywhere with him, fingers already curling around the charcoal pencil he preferred over all the expensive art supplies Laurie bought. The drawing emerged in confident strokes. A classroom. Desks arranged in perfect rows. A teacher at the board. And in the corner, separated by what looked like an invisible wall, a small figure with yellow hair. Alone. Always alone. Dr. Chen studied the drawing with the clinical eye of someone who'd seen 1,000 similar images. "That's very detailed, John. You have real talent." She glanced at Laurie through the mirror, and he saw it in her expression before she even spoke. The same conclusion 13 others had reached. "Mr. Robinson, could we talk privately?" The hallway outside the therapy room felt like a gallery in a museum, sterile, beautiful, empty. Dr. Chen closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a verdict. "There's nothing wrong with his cognitive function," she said, and Laurie wanted to scream that he knew that every specialist told him the same thing, that knowing didn't help. His comprehension is actually above grade level. The mutism isn't physiological, no damage to his vocal cords, no neurological impairment. It's selective. Psychological. "I know what selective mutism is, Dr. Chen." Laurie's voice came out harder than he intended. "What I need is the key to unlock it. Mr. Robinson, there is no key. Not one I can give you." Dr. Chen's expression softened with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. John experienced something, a trauma, a moment of profound fear or shame, that his mind has associated with speaking. Until he feels safe enough to use his voice again, no amount of therapy will force it. Safe? Laurie gestured at the mansion surrounding them, 42 rooms of climate-controlled perfection, security systems that could track a mosquito, staff trained to anticipate John's every need. He lives in the safest environment money can build. That's not the kind of safety I mean. But Laurie was already turning away, pulling out his phone to research the next specialist, the next treatment, the next possibility. Because giving up wasn't an option. Accepting that his billions couldn't fix his son wasn't an option. Behind the therapy room door, John finished another drawing. This one showed a bird in a gilded cage, its beak open in a song no one could hear. Present day. John's schedule allowed for 45 minutes of outdoor sensory integration between occupational therapy and his tutoring session. The term made it sound clinical, purposeful. Really, it just meant sitting on the front steps while Marcus watched from the doorway, making sure John didn't wander beyond the property line or do anything that might concern his father. The gated community was designed for silence. Manicured lawns stretched like green carpets between houses that looked more like museums than homes. The only sounds were landscaping crews on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always scheduled to finish before children came home from their private academies. Even the birds seemed to know better than to make too much noise. John had his sketch pad open, charcoal moving in careful strokes across the page. He was drawing the oak tree across the street, trying to capture the way its branches reached toward the sky like hands seeking something just out of reach. His therapist would probably read too much into it. She read too much into everything. Then he heard it. Laughter. Real laughter, not the polite kind adults used at his father's dinner parties. This was loud and uncontained, bubbling up from somewhere beyond the gate like music from a world he'd only seen through car windows. John's hand stilled. His head lifted. A girl's voice carried down the pristine sidewalk, animated and bright. Okay, so then the dragon, he's not even a scary dragon, right? He's actually really bad at being a dragon because he keeps sneezing fire at the wrong times. He accidentally sets the princess's birthday cake on fire. John stood without thinking, his sketch pad forgotten on the steps. His feet carried him to the iron gate, fingers curling around the bars as he peered through. She was maybe 16, 17, wearing a dress that looked like someone had captured a sunset and turned it into fabric, oranges and pinks and golds all swirled together. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that bounced as she moved, and she was gesturing wildly with her hands, acting out her story for Mrs. Chen's 9-year-old twins who stood transfixed on their driveway. And the princess, the girl continued, spinning in a circle, she's not even mad. She's like, you know what? I hate cake anyway. Let's have dragon-toasted marshmallows instead. And that's how the princess and the sneezy dragon became best friends. The twins erupted in giggles. The girl took an exaggerated bow, then pulled some pamphlets from her canvas bag. So if you want to help support our community theater program, we're selling these raffle tickets. That's when she noticed John. Their eyes met through the bars of the gate, and something shifted in her expression. Not pity. Not the careful concern adults always wore around him. Just curiosity. Recognition, maybe. Like she saw something in him that others missed. She waved, not the polite little finger wiggle people used, but a big, sweeping wave that involved her whole arm. Then she walked straight toward him, her worn sneakers slapping against the sidewalk. Hey there, Captain Silent, she said, and the nickname should have felt mocking but somehow didn't. She crouched down to his eye level, even though he was on the other side of the gate. I'm Sandra. You like stories? John nodded before he could stop himself. Real communication. Voluntary response. His therapist would be thrilled. Sandra's grin widened. Good. Because I've got about 1 million of them, and most people tell me I talk too much. But you, she tilted her head, studying him, you look like someone who knows how to listen. And then, without waiting for permission or payment or any of the usual adult negotiations, Sandra Lucier began to tell him a story about a boy who collected silence like some people collected stamps, and what happened the day he found a silence so perfect it sang. Sandra finished her story and spotted a crushed soda can near the curb. She snatched it up, holding it aloft like a trophy. Okay, Captain, new mission. This, she shook the can, is actually a magical compass that only points toward adventures. But it's broken. See? She turned it in her hands, frowning dramatically. It's stuck pointing at boring things. We need to fix it. John watched, transfixed, as she grabbed a stick and started drawing symbols in the dirt beside the sidewalk. She was creating something, a map, maybe, or spell instructions. Her movements were fluid, unself-conscious, like she'd forgotten anyone was watching. Without thinking, John ran back to the steps, grabbed his sketch pad, and returned to the gate. He flipped to his most detailed drawing, the one he'd been working on for weeks. A door. Not just any door, but one covered in intricate locks and chains, with light seeping through the cracks. He pressed it against the bars. Sandra stopped mid-gesture. She came closer, really studying the drawing, her eyes tracking every careful line. Then she looked up at him, and her smile was different now. Knowing. You're not silent, Captain, she said softly. You're just selective about who gets to hear you. John's fingers tightened on the sketch pad. For the first time in 8 years, someone understood. Sandra sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, her dress pooling around her like petals. She'd been talking for 20 minutes now, and John hadn't moved from his side of the gate. Hadn't wanted to. So I'm saving up, she said, pulling her knees to her chest. Every raffle ticket, every pamphlet, every dollar goes into my theater fund. My drama teacher says I've got raw talent, which I think is code for, you're good but you can't afford real training. She laughed, but it had an edge. I want to be on a real stage someday. Broadway, maybe. Or at least somewhere people pay to watch instead of just walking past on the street. She looked at him through the bars. What about you, Captain? What do you dream about? John hesitated, then flipped to a blank page. His hand moved quickly this time, less careful. A stage. Curtains. And in the center, a small figure with yellow hair, mouth open, surrounded by darkness. Sandra leaned closer. You want to perform too? He shook his head and added another detail, the audience seats were empty. All of them. The figure on stage was screaming, but no one was there to hear. Oh. Sandra's voice went soft. You want to be heard. John's hand trembled as he turned to another page, one he'd drawn months ago but never shown anyone. The images came in fragments, the way trauma always did. A younger John, maybe 3 years old. His mother's face, twisted in anger, no, not anger. Fear. A shattered vase. His mouth open, caught mid-word. And in the corner, dark and heavy, the word bad in jagged letters. Sandra studied the drawing for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. That's a sad memory. I can see it hurt you. She reached through the bars, not touching him but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her hand. But memories don't get to be judges, Captain. Whatever you said that day, whatever happened, your voice isn't guilty. It's innocent. It's just been waiting for a fair trial. John's eyes burned. He nodded once, sharp and quick. From his study window on the second floor, Laurie Robinson watched the scene unfold with something approaching awe. He'd observed hundreds of therapy sessions through one-way mirrors, analyzed countless progress reports, reviewed endless hours of recorded interactions. None of them looked like this. John was engaged. Really engaged, not performing engagement for a therapist's benefit. He was sharing his art, his most private language, with a stranger. A stranger in a worn dress who'd walked up to their gate selling raffle tickets. Sir? Marcus appeared at his shoulder. Should I go down there? Mrs. Henderson called again. She wants to know if you're going to do something about the solicitor. Do something, Laurie repeated numbly. Yes. Yes, I should do something. Marcus nodded and turned toward the door. Wait. Laurie's voice stopped him. Offer her money. Whatever she needs. Tuition, housing, I don't care. He gestured at the window, at his son who was actually communicating, we need to keep her around. 5 minutes later, Marcus returned to the study, his expression carefully neutral. She said no, sir. What? I offered her $5,000. She looked at me like I'd insulted her. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Laurie a voice recording. Sandra's voice came through clear and firm, I'm not selling my friendship, sir. That's not how this works. Laurie sank into his chair, staring at the recording like it was evidence of something impossible. The girl with nothing had just refused everything he offered. And somehow, that made her even more valuable. Laurie's phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes. Mrs. Henderson. Again. He'd been ignoring her calls, watching his son interact with Sandra like he was witnessing a medical miracle in real time. But the fourth call came from Richard Pemberton, the HOA president, and that one he couldn't ignore. "Laurie, we have community standards," Richard's voice dripped with condescension. "Unauthorized solicitors are explicitly prohibited in our bylaws. Several residents have complained, and frankly, your property is ground zero. The optics aren't good." The optics. Everything in Laurie's world came down to optics. Board meetings. Business deals. Even his son's therapy sessions were calibrated for optimal presentation. "I'll handle it," Laurie heard himself say. He ended the call and stood, his reflection catching in the study's French doors. A billionaire who'd built empires couldn't tell his HOA president that a teenage girl in a worn dress was doing more for his son than $2.3 million in specialists. The optics weren't good. By the time Laurie reached the front lawn, Mrs. Henderson had beaten him there. She stood on the sidewalk in her tennis whites, perfectly coiffed hair trembling with indignation, pointing at Sandra like she was testifying in court. Completely inappropriate. Going door to door in a private community, harassing children. "I wasn't harassing anyone," Sandra said, her voice level but firm. She stood with her shoulders back, canvas bag clutched in both hands. "I was selling raffle tickets for the community theater program. It's a public sidewalk. A public sidewalk in a gated community." Mrs. Henderson's voice pitched higher. "You don't belong here. Anyone can see that." Something flickered across Sandra's face, hurt, quickly masked. "Anyone can see what, exactly?" Laurie opened his mouth to intervene, to tell Sandra she needed to leave before this escalated further. His son's miracle wasn't worth a neighborhood incident. Wasn't worth the phone calls he'd field for weeks. Wasn't worth. Then he saw John's face through the gate bars. His son wasn't drawing anymore. His sketch pad lay forgotten on the ground. John's small hands gripped the iron bars so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and his eyes were locked on Sandra with an intensity Laurie had never seen before. Mrs. Henderson continued her tirade. "I've already called security. They'll escort you out and make sure you don't come back." "Oh no," Sandra interrupted, and despite everything, a smile played at the corner of her mouth. "Not security. How will I ever recover from being escorted off a public sidewalk by a guy in a golf cart?" The absurdity of it hit John first. Or maybe it was relief that Sandra wasn't cowering. Maybe it was 8 years of pressure finding its only possible release. Whatever it was, it happened fast. John's mouth opened. His shoulders shook. And then sound, actual, audible, glorious sound, erupted from his throat. Laughter. Not silent shoulder shaking. Not breathless wheezing. Real, full-bodied, unbridled laughter that rang across the manicured lawn like church bells. Laurie's hands flew to his head, fingers digging into his scalp. His knees buckled. The world tilted sideways. Mrs. Henderson stopped mid-sentence, her mouth falling open. Sandra spun toward John, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been wonder. And John kept laughing, the sound raw and unpracticed and absolutely perfect. He pointed at Sandra, at Mrs. Henderson, at the whole absurd scene, and laughed like he was making up for 8 years of silence in a single, impossible moment. "John," Laurie breathed, but his voice couldn't carry over the sound of his son's joy. "My God. John." The boy who'd been silent since infancy had finally found something worth breaking his silence for, defending the first person who treated him like he was whole. The laughter faded into hiccuping gasps, and for a moment the world held its breath. Laurie remained frozen on the lawn, his hands still pressed against his head like he could hold this moment in place through sheer force of will. 8 years. 8 years of silence, and his son was making sounds. Mrs. Henderson recovered first, her shock curdling back into indignation. "Well, I don't care if the child thinks it's funny. This is still a violation of community. She didn't get to finish. The security golf cart rounded the corner, driven by Tom Jensen, who'd worked the gate for 6 years and took his job with the seriousness of a Secret Service agent. He pulled up to the curb, his face set in professional neutrality. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises," he said to Sandra, already reaching for his radio. "We've had multiple complaints about unauthorized." "No." The word cracked across the lawn like lightning. Everyone turned. John stood pressed against the gate, both hands wrapped around the bars, his face flushed and wet with tears Laurie hadn't even noticed falling. But his mouth was open, forming shapes it had refused to make for 8 years. "No!" John shouted again, louder this time, his voice rough and unpracticed, every syllable scraping against vocal cords that had forgotten their purpose. "Friend! Friend!" Laurie's legs finally unlocked. He stumbled forward, unable to process what he was hearing. John's small fist pounded against the gate. His eyes locked onto Sandra's face with desperate intensity. "Stay! Friend, stay!" Sandra dropped to her knees on the sidewalk, eye level with John through the bars. Her hand reached through the gate, not quite touching him, trembling in the air between them. "Captain." "Good." John's voice cracked. "Good girl. Friend is good." The words were fragmented, grammatically imperfect, but they were words. Real words, chosen and spoken with purpose. Not therapy prompted. Not carefully guided by specialists. These were words ripped from somewhere deep inside him, fueled by something no amount of clinical intervention could manufacture. Desperation. Love. The absolute need to protect someone who mattered. Mrs. Henderson made a noise of protest, but Laurie didn't hear it. He couldn't hear anything except his son's voice, rusty, broken, beautiful, fighting for a girl in a worn dress who'd refused his money. Tom Jensen still sat in his golf cart, finger hovering over the radio, looking between John and Laurie with obvious confusion. "Sir? Do you want me to stand down?" Laurie's voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder. "Stand down, Tom. Now." "But the complaints." "I don't care about the complaints." Laurie walked to the gate, his hands shaking as he reached for the lock. "I don't care about the HOA, or the bylaws, or what anyone thinks." He looked at Sandra, really looked at her, this teenager with the bright dress and brighter spirit who'd done the impossible. "This girl is a guest. My guest. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The gate swung open. John burst through it and grabbed Sandra's hand with both of his, holding on like she might disappear if he let go. "Stay," he whispered, and then, testing the word, tasting it, "please?" Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not going anywhere, Captain. I promise." Laurie watched his son, his silent, unreachable son, cling to a stranger who'd given him what no specialist could, a reason worth speaking for. Mrs. Henderson huffed and stormed away. Tom Jensen put his golf cart in reverse and quietly disappeared. And Laurie stood there watching his entire understanding of his son's condition reconstruct itself in real time. John hadn't needed a key to unlock his voice. He'd needed something worth unlocking it for. Inside the mansion, Laurie tried to find words that matched the magnitude of what Sandra had given him. "I can pay you. Tutoring, companionship, whatever you want to call it." "No." Sandra's voice was gentle but firm. Before Laurie could argue, John tugged Sandra's hand, leading her through the cavernous rooms to the neglected piano in the corner. His mother's piano, untouched since she left. John pointed at the keys, then at Sandra. A question without words. Sandra sat on the bench, her fingers finding the keys like coming home. She sang something simple and soulful, her voice filling the empty spaces the mansion had always held. When the last note faded, John whispered, not shouted, not desperate, but chosen, sing. Then, softer, more. The HOA escalated Mrs. Henderson's complaint to a formal hearing. Laurie sat in the community board room, listening to accusations about harboring unauthorized individuals and undermining neighborhood security protocols. Then John stood. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the Robinson boy didn't speak. Sandra saw me, John said, his voice quiet but steady. Each word was deliberate, hard-won. Not my problem. Not my silence. Me. He looked at the board members, then at his father. She is my voice's beginning. The charges dissolved like mist. Afterward, Laurie established a scholarship fund in Sandra's name, not charity, but investment in the girl who'd taught him that some miracles can't be bought, only welcomed. Laurie Robinson stood before Sandra, no longer the intimidating billionaire, but a grateful father. He didn't offer her a job, he offered her a bridge. This isn't compensation, Sandra. This is partnership. John needs you. Not as a tutor, not as an employee, but as his friend, the person who taught him his voice was a gift, not a threat. He formally invited her to be a constant presence, arranging for her housing, education, and artistic pursuits, not as charity, but as an investment in the family's future. Sandra, seeing the sincerity in Laurie's eyes and the pleading hope in John's, accepted. The mansion gradually changed. The sterile silence was replaced by Sandra's booming laughter and the sound of John's voice, which, though still selective, was used with purpose and joy. Sandra used the funds Laurie provided to attend a prestigious art school, focusing on expressive performance and drama therapy. She never forgot where her own story truly began, bringing the warmth and chaos of the outside world into the rigid structure of John's life. Years later, John Larry, now a thoughtful, selectively articulate teenager, stood on a brightly lit stage. The moment was Sandra Lucier's college graduation. John wasn't there as a relative or a friend's brother, he was there as the speaker introducing the commencement performer. He looked out at the audience, his blue eyes calm and steady. People often ask me about my voice, he said, the microphone catching every perfectly enunciated syllable. They ask what doctor, what therapy, what miracle drug finally fixed me. He paused, a gentle smile spreading across his face. The truth is, I was never broken. I was just waiting for the right audience. And my audience was found right outside my gate. He turned to Sandra, who stood beaming in her cap and gown. Sandra didn't teach me how to speak. She taught me that joy always finds a voice. And because of her, I learned to listen to mine. The final scene took place in a city park, the sound of children's laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. John and Sandra, now a successful performance artist specializing in youth mentorship, were leading a group of children with selective communication disorders. They weren't using clinical protocols, they were using sticks, crushed cans, and dramatic storytelling, just like Sandra had done years ago. John, who had once been isolated by his silence, was now the calm center of the group, translating the children's expressions and drawings into shared narratives. Together, they proved that love doesn't need words, it just needs connection. The boy with everything and the girl with nothing had saved each other, showing that the greatest families are those forged not by blood, but by a shared, impossible miracle of being seen.